Hey, what's up, everybody? It's the Collective Dismal here. I wanted to make a video tonight for you all doing something that I've never done on this channel before. And what I'm going to be doing is reviewing a film. Now, I have reviewed films on YouTube before, but always in the company of others. But for this one, I wanted to try my hand at doing a solo interpretation and exegesis of the film Blue Velvet by David Lynch. And I've been on this really intense Lynch kick lately. I don't know what compelled me to want to go down the rabbit hole with his films, but this is the second time that I saw this film. I watched it earlier today, and I watched it one time earlier this week. And I was instantly enamored with it because the film presents as something understandable entirely at the surface level, but there is this inkling of something so much deeper, something so much more profound to be unveiled and discussed and analyzed. And so, of course, as usual, I went to YouTube and I scoured the platform, all these different uploads of people doing analyses of this film, exploring the real meaning, the underlying meaning, the symbolic meaning of Blue Velvet. And I was very unimpressed with what I found for the most part. And the reason that I wanted to do this analysis alone was because I feel like I have certain insights, certain takes on this film that nobody else has really touched on. And I'm not saying I'm special in any way. I haven't heard it interpreted in this way. And so I feel like I have an obligation to make this video. Much like my YouTube channel in general, where I deal with issues affecting the dating market, sociology in general, the black pill, all of this, men's issues. The reason I was so compelled to make a channel going over all of these topics is because I simply felt that nobody was getting it right. Nobody was saying what needed to be said. And there were certainly people that were getting closer than others, many of whom are giants that I now stand on the shoulder of. They need not be named, but there was a lot missing. A lot of people just weren't in the position. They didn't have the life experiences. They didn't have the background knowledge or education or whatever it was to really adequately assess these social phenomena. And so I felt like I had to do something about it. And so, I made my channel and the rest is history. And this is the same in a sense. I don't hear anybody exactly putting it the way that I'm going to be in this video. And I feel like were this film to feature on one of these film review channels that I often partake in, it would be too much to go into. There's too many, that the conversation would move too fast, too many actors on the stage, no pun intended. I don't think it would be able to be done justice. And certainly I will not be able to do justice to this. Because each point that I'm going to make here warrants a video in and of itself, which could probably fill a quite lengthy video in itself. So this is just going to be some disparate thoughts and takeaways that I had from this film. So before getting right into it, I'm going to say this video assumes that you've already seen the film. So I'm not going to be really providing any kind of synopsis of the plot. I'm not going to be giving any kind of explanations or anything of that sort. We're going to jump straight into this as if everybody who's going to be listening has seen it. If you did not watch this film, do not watch this video, because this is probably going to just seem unintelligible. And this is probably not going to appeal to most listeners of my content in general. It's not really intended for the bulk of my viewership. It's something that maybe I will put up and hopefully people will come across it. Maybe the algorithm will be kind and it'll get a little bit of viewership from outside of the sphere that I typically tailor my videos toward. So when you watch the explanation videos, the analyses of this film, usually they come away with this same the same interpretation that what is being depicted in the film Blue Velvet is this idyllic American life that is under the surface a lie, a facade. The film opens with flower beds, white picket fences, little children running around in the yard, and the guy watering the picture-perfect grass. It's all picturesque. It's kind of like, the peak of Americana and whatever, and then it instantly, it kind of descends into depravity, degeneracy, and crime, and all of these things. And so they've taken this to be, most people, as far as I can ascertain, view this film to be about like the death of the idyllic American dream, whatever you want to call it. And I completely reject that interpretation. I view this film as much more of a kind of a personal inner quest. The main protagonist is Jeffrey. So there's more or less 4 main characters who are featured in this movie: Jeffrey, Sandy, Dorothy, and Frank. And I think the film more or less hinges on Jeffrey's exploration of his own latent capacities for sadism, violence, his own inner darkness, essentially. Now, I will say I don't want to be entirely dismissive of the other content creators on YouTube who have undertaken to explain this film or to analyze it. There's a lot of things a lot of different Easter eggs and symbolic references that they point out and make sense of that, had evaded me or had eluded me. So I won't say their understanding of the film was completely off base or unworthy. I just think that they get the grand scheme of it wrong. They're situating the whole thing wrong. There's a scene where Sandy is sitting in a diner with Jeffrey, and he's explaining to her, he's followed Frank and his friends to this hideout, and he took pictures of them, covert operation type deal, and this is what he's seen, and he's kind of, the whole thing is unfolding before his eyes. It's this case is taking on a life of its own. It's bigger than he had ever imagined, and he's so enthusiastic as he's telling her about this. And she says, "So what are you going to do? Are you going to pursue this further?" And without a moment's hesitation, he says, "Well, yeah, of course." And she looks almost repulsed. There's almost a look of repulsion, confusion, concern, etc. on her face. And she asks him, Why are you doing this? Are you really that curious? And he says, well, yeah. And I think that conversation is the starting point for an accurate and appropriate analysis of this film. Understanding Jeffrey's motives for delving into this case, regardless of the inherent danger, the threat that this could potentially pose to himself as well as everybody around him, putting other people in jeopardy. It's almost as if he never even questions the idea of not pursuing this as far as he possibly can for even a moment. Whereas Sandy, on the other hand, can't seem to understand the reason or the rationale behind his decision to carry on with this vigilante investigation of these extremely dangerous people, this extremely bizarre and intense situation involving human trafficking, extortion, kidnapping, organized crime, etc. He almost just seems like he's being compelled to delve deeper and deeper into the depths of depravity that he's finding and discovering by some greater force. And I think what that greater force is probably, I think that force is best described as seeking and a desiring to understand himself in a way that he's not really cognizant of. And what I mean by that is, when you go back to the start of this video, I said that I think this video is more or less about the latent capacities within him, these undiscovered capabilities to commit violence, to be sadistic, masochistic. Almost like, if I could contrast to another film, would be Crash with Sandra Bullock and Brendan Fraser, Ludacris, etc. It's kind of a star-studded cast, too many to name, but the dynamic between the veteran cop and the rookie cop, when the veteran remarks to the rookie cop, who asks to be reassigned to a different partner after observing the former groping a woman inappropriately during a traffic stop, where he kind of messes with this couple who's had a little bit to drink, and he frisks her and he reaches a little too far up her skirt. And the rookie cop is kind of bored by this. He's disgusted and disturbed. This is not what he became an officer for. And he gets reassigned to another partner, but the veteran cop kind of grabs him by the arm and he looks him in the eye and he whispers to him something to the effect that you may think you know who you are, but you don't. You have not been on the force, you've not been in the line of duty long enough to possibly understand yourself, what you would do given certain situations that you've never encountered before. And I think that theme is really true for all of us. I mean, you don't know who you are unless you are actually placed in a given situation where you're compelled to act in certain ways. The right conditions have to obtain for this kind of revelation of self, for the real person who you are to be revealed. Even you don't know it, because anybody can say, in the lieu of good health or safety and comfort, I would never do X. I would never engage in Y. I wouldn't even entertain the idea of cannibalism if I was lost at sea or trapped on an island, etc. But you cannot know that. I do not think you can conclusively know that beforehand. And there's the scene where Frank is first introduced in the apartment when Jeffrey is hiding in the closet, and he's forced to bear witness to Dorothy being raped by Frank, who he performs this very intense, very, deranged sexual ritual with involving the blue velvet and all of these things. And he starts punching her at a certain point. He starts hitting her and saying, "Don't look at me, don't look at me," all of these things. And Jeffrey, he winces when Frank hits Dorothy. But after Frank leaves and Jeffrey emerges from the closet, and there's this kind of intimacy scene between Dorothy. He tries to, Jeffrey tries comforting her, and it kind of turns intimate, and she requests him to hit her, and he doesn't. He declines, to her dissatisfaction. And then later, there's a scene where Jeffrey reconvenes with Sandy in the car, and he asks her, why are there people like Frank in the world? And this is what he wants to know, right? This is fundamentally why he is unrelenting in his kind of growing involvement in pursuing this case. Danger aside, he wants to answer that fundamental question: why are there people like Frank? But what he's really asking, unbeknownst to himself, is how do people like me become people like Frank? Like, what course of life events must unfold in order that some once normal person, such as himself, becomes this, sadomasochistic, violent pervert like Frank? And this is the point in the movie where Sandy recalls a dream to Jeffrey about love and pigeons and the darkness and all of that. That would warrant another video. This is already going to run quite long, and it would take us too far afield for me to get into that aspect of the film. But as the film progresses, Jeffrey more and more continues to see Dorothy. He's kind of like a visitor of the night. He's coming by to see her, and they're having sex together. And there's this scene where, again, she requests that he hit her during sex, and he refuses, and she goes a little mad. She starts lashing out, telling him to just leave, just get out. And at which time, in order to kind of calm her or whatever, he punches her a few times in the face and then continues having sex with her. And he likes it. He likes it. And he goes home and he has a dream that night where he relives the moment of him striking her in the face. And he wakes up in tears because I think, he enjoyed it. And he doesn't understand why he's become this way. And I think the film further kind of affirms this later on when they are going for the joyride in the car, and Jeffrey's being sort of restrained in the back seat while Frank drives around. He's going 120 miles per hour, driving all over the place, and they stop at a certain point, and they're all talking in the car, and Frank's kind of twisted around in the back seat talking to Jeffrey, and he's wielding a gun in his hand, and he's saying, "Don't look at me. I shoot when I see the whites of the eyes." And then, upon hearing this, Jeffrey averts his vision away from Frank, and Frank, his expression changes, his very pronounced way, and he says, "You're like me. all your remarks, and there's not a lot of context given. I don't understand exactly what it was that Frank seen in Jeffrey. Perhaps it's not even there to be further analyzed, but he sees something in him that causes him to remark, "You are like me," with this kind of bewildered look on his face. Now I'm going to get into two more themes, and the first one is going to be the bliss of blind ignorance. And the second is going to be some of the biblical themes that recur throughout this film. So, when Jeffrey first meets Sandy, we're first introduced to Sandy in the film. She's telling a story about how she overheard her father, who is a detective, and he's mentioned this apartment building where Sandy lives. And she remarks twice, in order to really stress the point. She says, "It's not far from where you live. Would you like me to take you there?" And she says more or less verbatim the same thing again, "Yeah, it's close to where you live. We can go." And throughout the film, again and again, people are referring to one another as neighbors. They're really stressing the point, "I live near you." When Jeffrey first goes to meet Sandy's father, the detective, at the police station to turn in the human ear that he finds in the field, he says, "Hey, I'm Jeffrey. I live near you. I think you know my father." And again, the scene when Frank catches Jeffrey coming out of Dorothy's apartment. He says, "Who the fuck is this?" And Dorothy says, "Oh, that's just our neighbor. That's just a neighbor. He's a nice person." And he said, "Oh, neighbor, neighbor." They keep calling him this, "Your neighbor." And again, when they go to Ben's house, and there's that really weird sequence where he's singing the Candyman song, and he keeps saying, "Hey, neighbor," like, I think that the reason why there's so much emphasis placed on this is because they want to drive home the point that all of this stuff, all of this depravity, all of this violence and criminality, and all of this fetishism, all of it, all the ugliness of life exists very close to the comforts of your home. But many people are not just choosing not to see it, but are incapable. They're blind to it. Probably as sort of an evolved mechanism of like self-preservation. They don't want to be made explicitly aware of the kind of truth and validity of like pessimism about humanity. I'll give another few examples from the film to really solidify this point and to bolster it. So, when Jeffrey first meets Dorothy at her apartment, and she's very mad that at his voyeurism, that she's found him hiding in the closet watching her undress and eavesdropping on her phone calls, etc. And she arms herself with a knife and she cuts his cheek with it, and it's, clearly draws blood. It leaves a mark. Yet the very next day, 24 hours later, when Jeffrey is in the car talking about the events of last night with Sandy, the cut no longer appears on his face. His face is unblemished. And this said to me, it kind of reaffirmed the point that she is blind to the kind of seedy aspects of life, the darker side, the underworld, whatever you want to call it. She's blind to it. It's imperceptible to her. She's capable of ignoring the writing on the wall. And same thing with the grandmother. They're constantly watching the television, and on the television, it's whatever they're watching is a very violent show. You see these short, brief snippets from the show where, there's guns and shooting and whatever, killing. But it mirrors reality right before their eyes. Like as Jeffrey is walking down the steps, the feet are shown on the show walking down the steps, like with his same cadence and everything like that. Yet they don't really put two and two together, which should be so obvious. They exist in this state of blind ignorance where they're completely unable to connect the dots that are right in front of their eyes at all times in order to reveal the more unflattering side of nature, let's say. One more point about this is near the end of the film, when Sandy and Jeffrey are in the car together and they begin, they're being pursued by another car that's hitting them and trying to run them off the road. And at first he thinks it's Frank, and he says he's going to go home to get a gun because this guy's a killer. However, they realize that it's Sandy's boyfriend, she's kind of cheated on with, I think his name's Matt. And they pull up, and this guy Matt gets out of the car, and he's with his droogs, and they kind of walk over, and he says, you took my girlfriend from me. Get out of the car. I'm going to fight you. And Jeffrey gets out of the car with zero fear whatsoever. But at the same time, he's not exactly even acknowledging that this guy wants to fight him. He's sort of like fearless, but he's not aggressing in any way. He's just acting almost as if he exists in like a different universe than this guy. The guy's kind of like, all right, let's knuckle up. And at this moment, Dorothy appears, and she's completely nude, standing on the front lawn of Jeffrey's house, and she's been, physically beaten. Her eye is swollen shut. She's like covered in scratches and cuts, like she just escaped, from a grape or something like that. And upon seeing this, Matt, he says, I'm sorry, I didn't know, I'm sorry. He basically, immediate 180, like this attitudinal 180, where he went from being like this guy getting in your face, all right, let's fight, I'm going to beat your ass, to this guy who's basically like completely wrought with fear. And they sort of just ignore him, and he's left there like blithering, I'm sorry, apologizing. And one of Matt's friends remarks like, hey, I thought you were going to kick his ass. And the way that I interpreted this scene was that, again, this guy was one of these people that he didn't want to see what he kind of intuited may exist right there below his nose, what these people may be caught up in, what Jeffrey may be involved with. He was almost like blinded by the truth of it. He didn't want to know. All of his tough guy shtick was all a facade. It was all kind of fake, because ultimately when he saw real violence, real depravity, he instantly knew that he didn't want any further part of this. And this is going to carry us into the last part of this video where I want to talk about some of the biblical themes, I think, that occur throughout this film. So I think one of the more obvious ones is the parallel to Adam and Eve and the fall from grace. That's sort of an obvious one to me. I don't know why. I don't think I've heard anybody else talking about this, but if somebody has mentioned this before me, I'll be the first to walk it back and say, fair play, but I don't know who else is kind of like spinning it this way. But when we're first introduced to Dorothy outside of, her family home, as Jeffrey brought the ear to Sandy's father, the detective. He found this human ear. He did the right thing. He brought it to the police station and had the detective look at it. And then the detective sat him down and said, "Now, Jeffrey, I know you'll probably be curious. You'll have all kind of questions about this ear that you found. However, someday I can tell you, when all is said and done and enough time has passed. But in the interim, you cannot mention this to anybody, and I can't tell you anything about it." Kind of like, in a way, you have to be a little bit kept in the dark. You can't really know the truth of it, but nor would you want to. Let's be honest. You may think you want to know, but do you really want to know? Do you really want the burden of having your entire naive perspective shattered, right? Probably not. And so he says, "I understand, sir," like a good boy, good old boy type, like Boy Scout. And "I understand, sir." And then he walks out of the house. They say, "Have a great night. Tell your father I said hi." And he's walking down the street. And Sandy emerges from the dark. This is very emphasized in the film. She emerges from the shadows and she says, "Are you the guy that found that ear?" And he says, "Yeah, why?" And she says, "Oh, my room is right above my father's office. I eavesdropped on him. I heard him mention this apartment of this woman. It's very near to your house, etc. I think she's involved with it somehow." The ear is almost like the snake in the garden tempting Eve to tempt Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge. And so obviously this piques his curiosity, this piques his intrigue, and he says, "Can you take me there?" And she's like, "Well, I thought you weren't supposed to talk about it." And he says, "Yeah, but you brought it up." And then later in the film, when he's asking her to kind of do him a favor and helping him break into this apartment, she says, "I really don't want to, but I guess I got you into this." There's an acknowledgement, explicit acknowledgement, that she was the one that spurned this whole thing of his fanaticism about this case and getting to the bottom of it. But moving beyond that, there's this outstanding symbol in the film, and it's the title of the film, and it's kind of the most pronounced symbol in the film, which is the blue velvet itself. The blue velvet that Frank makes Dorothy wear when he grapes her, and he kind of shoves it in her mouth, and then at another time he shoves it in Jeffrey's mouth when he puts on lipstick, and he presumably grapes him too. That's sort of left to the imagination of the viewer. And that's when again Frank says, "Don't be a good neighbor to her," after acknowledging that he said, "You're like me." But I think the blue velvet represents the veil of the tabernacle in Exodus. And I don't want to reach too far into kind of like speculative territory when I say that, or be like overly overinterpret. But in the Old Testament, the veil of the tabernacle is depicted as blue, and it separates the holiest of holies, where the Ark of the Covenant is housed in Solomon's temple. And only the high priest can access this place. And when Frank carries out this grape in this scene against Dorothy, there's almost kind of like a religious ceremonial pleading. He gets down on his knees like he's kind of pleading, as one would when they were, pleading for salvation, for their own salvation. And again, after Jeffrey strikes Dorothy in the face while they're having sex, she says, I have your disease in me now. And again, before he's leaving, she reassures him. She says, you think I'm crazy? She says, I'm not crazy. I know the difference between right and wrong. And so she's morally sound, right? She's trying to stress the point and convince him that she is a morally sound person, despite that he may not understand what makes her tick or whatever. But she says, you are in me now. You're my special friend. And this is like the most beautiful she's depicted in this film. When she says that, she's smiling, she's kind of radiating beauty in this scene. She doesn't look depressed. She's kind of illuminated in her glee and it's the most coherent she is in the whole film. And she says, you are in me now. Almost like she's absolved him of, again, this kind of latent violence, this sin, whatever it was, this sexual sadism that he had. She's sort of taken the burden like a punching bag. She's absorbed it like a sponge, and she reassures him. I have your disease in me now. Not unlike, Christ the Redeemer. And I'm going to further strengthen this point. So, at the very end of the film, when his two worlds finally kind of collide, right? The dark, seedy world that he's gotten himself involved in by way of curiosity, not unlike Adam in the garden, and the this kind of gracefully ignorant, idyllic world with Sandy and the nice picket fences, everything like that. And the two worlds come crashing into one another when Dorothy shows up naked and beaten to a pulp at his house. And Jeffrey's hugging her and she's crying. And he's got his coat wrapped around her. He's saying, call an ambulance and all of this. And Dorothy looks at Sandy and she's distraught. She's disheveled. She's, not of sound mind at all. And she says, he put his disease in me. Not unlike the trial of Christ, she's gone from being this very clairvoyant person, knowing the fate that was inevitably to befall her, to being stripped naked, beaten, and humiliated. And I guess I'm going to just leave that point there, but this would be the entry point into an even deeper analysis of this movie, which I do think is warranted. I do think that somebody more well versed in biblical exegesis, theology, and um, film studies, Lynch scholarship, whatever you want to say, like the relevant disciplines than myself. I'm a lay person, but this would be like the entry point into an even deeper level of analysis where I think you could probably go through and parallel the entirety of this movie with certain biblical themes, wherein Dorothy almost gets sort of depicted as um maybe this Christ like redeeming figure. So there's only two more points that I want to make. They're just very brief. Number one, I couldn't make any sense of this, but maybe somebody with a little better pattern recognition could. When Jeffrey's first taken to Dorothy's apartment building by Sandy, she lives on Lincoln Street, and the street sign is clearly positioned in the frame of the shot for like a good duration of time, 5 seconds, if not more. And Frank Booth is the name of the main antagonist in this film. So I wasn't sure what to make of that. Obviously some references here to John Wilkes Booth and the assassination of President Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln. But I couldn't really, maybe it'll come to me, but I couldn't really make heads or tails of that particular reference. And the last thing was simply Jeffrey's dad's illness. That sort of stood out to me because it features in the film as like a very pivotal aspect of the film. And my best explanation for it is that it not only was it pivotal, it was nothing else besides pivotal. And what I mean by that is that Jeffrey's father had taken ill. You know, with the opening scene of the film, he's watering the grass and he falls down with, you know, like suddenly something's happened to him. He has some acute problem and he falls down clutching the back of his neck. And in the next scene, he's shown in a hospital bed and he's completely unable to speak and his head is in a harness, almost like you had, you know, broken your neck and his head's sort of fixed. But there's nothing that broke his neck in the scene where he falls. It almost looks more like maybe he had a stroke or a heart attack or something like that. But it's never made clear exactly what he suffered, because I think that in leaving that unclear, Lynch was probably trying to stress the point that it's not important. Now, Jeffrey's dad's incident was what caused Jeffrey to come home from school. He was it's the point is alluded to that he was away at school. Again, they don't say what he was studying or how far away he was or anything like that. He's away at college and his father suddenly takes ill and he comes home. And this is when he finds the ear. This is when he meets Sandy. This is when he meets Dorothy. This is when he meets Frank. This is when he discovers himself. And the whole point of the father is that the role he serves is is a catalytic role that sets off a kind of chain of life-altering events. And this is how these things happen. These seemingly very mundane events in our lives. This has been my experience throughout life. These seemingly very mundane, very commonplace things can set off domino effects where you're taken in this direction, you meet this person, they take you in another direction, you learn this new thing, etc., etc., etc. And before you know it, you're not the person that you were anymore. And like, I don't believe in the self. And I think, like myself, to a large extent, I think David Lynch was influenced by Eastern thought. Probably particular the idea of anatman, no self. So since we don't have a fixed kind of intransient self, then what the self is conceptual in nature. And it's not a fixed concept, it's a developmental one. This is the whole point of this film, is that it's the self is a concept which is updated in lieu of experiences as we engage with the world and we are placed into novel situations and circumstances. We act in ways which we could not really previously have anticipated ourselves acting in. And these are set in motion by very inconspicuous events in our lives. So that's really all I had to say about this. Hopefully I did it justice. I had to try to big brain this a little bit, but I didn't want to come across as being like too pseudo either. Again, this isn't my forte. I have a lot of humility and a lot of timidity in making this video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys seen the film and come back and listen to this, and hopefully that helped you make sense of certain themes and gave you a bit of a roadmap for delving further than I have into exploring even deeper themes within themes, etc. And yeah, Happy New Year's, guys. Dismal days indeed.